Primary capital is I'm going to put new money into a venture and the company itself is going to get that money. Distinct, very distinct from trading in the traditional capital markets, buying and selling shares of stock through your brokerage. That's all secondary market, right? In other words, if I invest in Google, they don't get my money, right? I'm just buying from someone else on the other side of the trade. That's the secondary market. So, after the Depression, and you had the acts of 33, 34, and 40, you had a far more restricted landscape in terms of how capital formation could occur. And by the way, the SEC's mission, I forget the exact mission statement, but in there are the words capital formation. You could no longer stand in the middle of the street with a sandwich board and say, I want to take capital. Instead, you were, if you were raising money for a new entity, you were approaching wealthy people. You were approaching other established entities that have money and saying, I want to put this new entity together. I want to put together a new company. And that was the process of capital formation. And that persisted for a very, very long time. Exceedingly limited number of ways that you could do capital formation. And this is all outside the public markets. This is all private market. An exceedingly limited number of ways in which you could do that process. Now, what changed here more recently in 2012 was the Jobs Act. So the Jobs Act had lots of stuff in it, but the piece of it that's relevant to capital formation was the establishment of two new regulations. One was called Reg A plus, and the other is called Reg CF. They allow for, within certain confines, a general solicitation targeting investors who are not accredited. And they enable capital formation from traditional, people like you and me, like regular, people who are not necessarily accredited investors. Reg CF, it's a lot of capital. Reg CF is slightly lighter weight regulation. So instead of having to put together this mini prospectus, you need to put together an even more miniature one. It's less onerous, and the subsequent reporting requirements are less onerous. And that lets you raise up to $5 million, again, from the general public. That's an increase from the original approximately 1 million. So started as you could raise up to $1 million. Now you can raise up to $5 million. And people are using it. Companies are using it, with some fairly successfully, some a lot less successfully, but it's definitely in use. And it's a huge change because now your uncle can say, I want to open that car wash. You might not need $75 million for it, but maybe he needs $2 million for it. And he can go out on the street with a sandwich board and say, I want to raise some money. Now, he can't actually take the money and put it in his pockets. He needs to use an intermediary. The intermediary charges fees, and there's a whole racket there. But the fact that he can do it, the fact that he can go into his own community and say, hey, I want to raise money for this car wash, is really important. And here's why. Outsiders, wealthy individuals who don't live near your uncle, they may not understand the need for that car wash in that community. They may say, is there really demand for this? Do people really care? But if you live in that community, people who live in that community with your uncle, they will have a sense, perhaps, as to whether or not there's demand for that car wash. And maybe, one of them will say to himself, you know what? There's tons of demand for this. I really want a car wash here, right? Not just because I want to be able to wash my car, but also because I think it will generate good returns. There are no other car washes in a 50-mile radius, and there are tons of cars here. And I happen to know that because I'm in the community. Well, great. Now your uncle connects directly with this, this individual, and the individual can put in $500, $100. It's not going to necessarily be the fastest process if everyone's putting in $100, but the ability to get involved in the capital formation process when you have an insight as to the value proposition of that business where others might not. That's what's so important here. And I would say that Reg A plus and Reg CF have certainly not fully solved the problem. They've solved it a little bit, but you can tell that there continues to be significant demand for capital formation through mechanisms outside of Reg D, outside of the venture world. What could be interesting is the coexistence of the two and the continued growth of equity crowdfunding and the ability for people who are not venture capitalists to get involved in opportunities where they otherwise would not have the chance. And I think that coexistence can actually be not just healthy, but beyond that, I would say symbiotic. And a good example of that is a situation in which there's a consumer-facing product and the users are excited about the product and they want to put in capital, right? And that can sit right alongside the VCs.
I'm also curious, you mentioned, some of these cybersecurity companies have had very successful exits. So someone invests today, if they decide to invest today, their money gets locked up, they own equity in Atacama. And then what does the exit process look like? And maybe what sort of timeline or general timeline investors can expect for when they can or when they do exit?
Exits can come in a variety of different, an exit can be an acquisition by another cybersecurity company or another company in general. Oftentimes, cybersecurity companies will acquire other cybersecurity. An exit could be in the form of an IPO. An exit could be in the form of an acquisition not by a cybersecurity company or other company, but rather by a financial sponsor, by private equity. So those are 3 examples. And of course, we are not opposed to any of those 3. All 3 of those would be interesting ways, good ways of affecting an exit. Right now, the way we're thinking about it, build the most powerful business we can build, grow revenue as powerfully as we can, create a bunch of really happy customers who want to continue to spend, grow the product line. We do those things and we do them well. And I'm confident that an appropriate exit will appear. I think it's important to mention the ways in which exits can occur. But I think simultaneously, it's important to mention that the team at Anakama is focused on building the business. We have confidence that building a good business will ultimately result in a good exit in one of those forms or some other form.